Hello, welcome to the Mychal Raynes channel. I'm Mychal Raynes. Recently, we have seen that the Japan Nikkei has hit a previous high that it hadn't hit since 1991. So what does that mean? Well, it means if you've been in the Nikkei, you've done pretty good. But there's a lot of other lessons to be learned here. I just, out of all the lessons that are going on, I'd like to just focus on a couple of them in this video, but they're pretty important. So in order to understand this situation here, we need to kind of go back through history and take a look at what's happened in the past and, what it means for the future and what it means for people outside of Japan. In the 1980s, Japanese stock market was where you wanted to be. There was no better place. Maybe the only better place might have been Japanese real estate. It was the highest rate of return that you could get. It was going parabolic. And in 1991, the market crashed. When the market crashed, the government of Japan decided to bail out the banks. They didn't let the banks fail, but they had all this debt on their balance sheet and they were basically insolvent. So they called them zombie banks. And because the banks were trapped in a situation like this, it didn't allow, the investment needed, and the banks weren't able to operate in a way where Japan could experience economic growth. And this persisted through the 90s. Matter of fact, it was so bad that they called the 90s the lost decade. And then we get into the 2000s and it still hasn't recovered. But in 2001, Japan decided to drop their interest rate to basically to zero. And that kicked off, major yen carry trade. And that went from 2001 to 2006. And all that is people were borrowing yen at a 0% rate, and then they were investing it, say, in like US treasuries with a lot of leverage though. And that works fine as long as everything stays the same, because you're getting your rate of return on your treasuries with leverage and you're doing it at a 0% interest rate. But once that interest rate starts rising, the whole thing unravels. And that happened in 2006. And a lot of people don't know, but that was a big factor in the Great Recession that we experienced. It was, tied to the Japanese economy and to the yen carry trade, borrowing yen, carrying it over. It was a big time contributing factor. So another thing that achieved was that, not falsely, was reality, but it made the value of the yen weak, and it made the value of the US dollar really strong, because everybody, Wall Street and everybody's doing this yen carry trade. Well, that unwinds, the recession happens, and Japan, and it's over, and Japan still isn't back to that high that it achieved in 1991. And it took until a couple weeks ago for, the Nikkei to catch up. So, let's count the years there. What is that, 27 years? People always say, Mychal, you're just a market bear. You're always worried about, bad things happen in the economy. Well, if, that might be true, because I do worry about it, but I'm also a bull. I'm not just a bear. I bullish, and all bull means is you're optimistic, and bear means you're pessimistic. And I like to think I'm in the middle, and not just to be in the middle, but I get the protection of worrying about bad things, and I get the advantage of being into, the good times. So I just would rather be protected. That's the number one priority that I have. And you see folks that are just all in the stock market. Well, if something happened in Japan for 27 years, and say you were to retire and you take a huge hit on your portfolio and you're just trying to make it through, man, that's going to be rough. That kind of cuts everything, in half, or takes a third off, and it never rebounds. You're never seeing the growth that you need to see to keep on plugging. And people think, well, that's just Japan, you know. This is just, you know, this can't happen anywhere else. It's Japan. Well, Japan, that's the second largest economy on planet Earth until a couple years ago when China finally surpassed it. So to think that, you know, bad economic times can't happen, you know, and that those days are over is not true. I mean, we're witnessing in history as we speak, you know, the unwinding of you know, big time economic crisis. So, you know, a good lesson come out of this is, you know, things like this can and do happen, and it's important to be protected. It's important to not just have all your assets into one asset class like the stock market. You know, it's important to be in multiple places. If it can happen in Japan, what economy would be safe from something like this? So those are some lessons about bailouts, a little bit of history, and a little bit of information, you know, on me and how I am as an investor. And hopefully with some of this stuff, you know, you've gained something from it. So that's going to wrap us up for today. You know, I remember as a kid hanging out with my great grandma, and she had some idiosyncrasies. And I would always ask my mom, you know, why does great grandma do this? Or how come she does that? She would say, oh, honey, you know, she grew up in the Depression. And looking back at it, you know, it was the 80s and early 90s. How does something that happens, you know, 50, 60 years beforehand still affect somebody that many decades later, even though the situation's changed? You know, I often think, what would I have to go through where even though things got better, I still remember those lessons and all the pain and trouble that it brought? Wow.